Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Javier. Habak is a melodic crust punk band with an emo post-rock influence. I'm kind of digging that. It's a cool description right there. I'm excited to see what we are in store for today. Today's track is called La no violencia es un privilegio, which translates to nonviolence is a privilege. So let's dive into this, see what's going on with Habak. I really dig the expressive drum work. It is simple in order to keep the beat, but has just enough nuance to it to make it interesting. Sharp tempo shift and a buildup of energy. We have mostly chordal work on the guitars, but we do have harmonies coming in from both of them. Bringing in a little bit of the rhythmic syncopation from the first drum part into this one, into the heavier sounds. While also focusing a little bit on that dark beauty from the first guitar riff as well. Yeah, okay, very cool. Introducing elements of our opening to the heavier, punkier section in order to help move into this part. Those ghost notes are crazy. I can't even hear the initial attack. I just hear the beads vibrating. Okay, I'm starting to hear the timbre of the attack now. It's interesting how much louder the drums are than the guitars in this moment too. Interesting song. It's devised of technically three sections. I view the intro and the outro as two very different ideas, but they're embodying much of the same concept. So we kind of bounce between two concepts, lighter and I think more emotionally vulnerable, and then heavier and driven and louder. Now, I don't know that there's a lot different going on with the guitar work, but the drums certainly change up their style between the two, and the inclusion of the vocals gives a lot of emphasis and weight to that middle section. So I think that's why everything ends up working fairly well together. I do find a little bit of disjointedness when I think about the two ideas in isolation, but the transitions between worked really well and helped try to pad over any of that obvious shift in atmosphere and change in energy between the two concepts. And I think that's why I find it really interesting coming out of this track is that when I think of these two moments, I don't really know how you would make them work together. They're pretty much polar opposites in a lot of ways, and yet the song pulls it off. It feels fluid, it feels natural to move between these lower energy and higher energy moments. That's not an easy feat, and they make it look really easy, but they're also merging these two genres. I mean, yes, emo comes from punk, but I mean, the type of emo that they're taking influence from here is not very punky at all. Light, nuanced drum work, and more of, like I mentioned, a vulnerable harmonic palette to it. Whereas the middle part of this track is just raw aggression. And that to me feels more traditional punk or crust punk, as was described to me here, which I'm still not super familiar with to be able to accurately listen to music and say, oh, this is definitely the crust punk subgenre. But it does end up feeling more of what I associate with punk in general, which is loud and raw and abrasive. And this leans in that direction pretty well. So it's marrying these two ideas that just on paper I would not think would work. I would like to see if they try to merge them more simultaneously in other tracks, but I think this is a really nice introduction to seeing these two sides of this band, and maybe there's even more sides that I'm not privy to with just this 5-minute introduction to them. However, I enjoyed this for the most part. The middle part, it would take me a little bit of time to adjust to the vocals, kind of lean a little bit more towards the black metal style, especially in the production. And they have that consistency of tone. You know, death metal, black metal, even metalcore, old school metalcore likes to not likes to, but frequently have vocalists who just find that one pitch and they're comfortable sticking with that one texture and then putting words to that. And we see that in here too. So it kind of it doesn't work as well for me personally on a subjective level. You all know I like my contrast and melodies. So the vocals are something I would have to adjust to. And the overall aggression isn't necessarily my cup of tea in the mid part, but I do think it works phenomenally well as contrast to the intro and outro. Although there's no clean vocals in here. Hmm. There's a lot of room in the end too. Those final like 50 seconds or so, there's room for melody. Vocalist could have dropped something in there, maybe another guitar line or something. I don't know. That would have been a good place for clean vocals though. But they decided not to go that route. All right. What else do we got to dive into here? I find the variability of this track to be interesting. I mean, we've already talked about like wide paintbrush ideas, right? Umbrella topics of loud and soft sections, but looking at more compositional ideas, the intro and outro are more focused on melodic harmonic movement, where I wouldn't necessarily say these are strong melodies, but it's not just playing chords. And we have the harmonic device of both guitars playing different notes, creating these harmonic ideas and filling out the chordal structure that we see on this. Now, granted, this harmonic idea comes in with both the the intro, the main section, the punky section, and the outro. In all of the sections, we have both guitars who are complementing each other harmonically and helping fill out the chordal information in the track. I will say that the middle section is the most straightforward, though, as both guitars are pretty much just playing chords. And we're hearing some higher notes on the left and some lower notes on the right, and that gives us a very wide stack of notes to understand the harmonic information from. We don't quite see that in the intro and outro, which, like I mentioned, are a bit more melodic. They're focusing on single notes rather than chord ideas. So we have a little bit of variability in the guitars, but we have a lot of variation in the drum work. The introduction to the song, like I had mentioned, the drums are keeping the beat, kind of sitting in that metronomic style of not focusing too much on the space between beats, not really focusing too much on syncopation, kind of locking into a core heartbeat for the entire song to kind of find as the core rhythmic element. But that doesn't mean that the drummer is just doing that. It's not a boring drum part. It's actually quite a bit of variation and ornamentation going on in here that helps expand out the rhythmic elements to it. And it's here that I think I found myself listening most in this opening section. I enjoyed what the guitars were doing. There's a nice duality between the two of them working together, but in their own ways in order to help this song create the atmospheric elements to it so we can kind of get lost in the emotion, which we'll touch on in a second, the emotional journey I went on with this track. But the drum work I found to be nicely expressive. As I mentioned, keeping the beat, but also exploring the idea, the section, exploring the rhythmic elements of it. And what seemed to me is a linear exploration where I didn't really feel too much as far as pattern was going. It might just be that I only heard like 16 bars of it before we moved on. So maybe there was repetition, maybe it was a bunch of 4-bar phrases and I just didn't pick up on it for some reason. But it seemed linear to me because all of the drum fills and little variations and ornamental ideas felt new to me, similar in conversation with itself, but always something a little different than what we heard before. It kept it fresh and interesting while also creating a bit of drive. The drums are what help pull us through this section. We do have a bit of forward momentum from the guitars because of the melodic ideas. They're exploring something a bit more narrative, trying to tell a bit of a story alongside with setting the atmosphere, but the drums are what really pull me through this entire section. And I found this moment to be, well, you can feel the intensity of it. There is a rising energy to it, but it also feels sorrowful. To me, this section embodies the concept of taking a moment to assess losses while also being prepared for that next step. trying to figure out how to come back from this low, from this loss. It is somber but dedicated, if that makes sense. It does to me, at least. And I think once the drummer shifts to the snare roll, and you can really feel the intensity start to rise as we're going to push into that B section, you can start to feel the adjustment in the guitars too as we lose some of that vulnerability, and the harmonic devices, the chordal progression begins to shift into something a bit more, it's not really aggressive, but we lose the vulnerable side, and it's more of a description of a state, like a factual description of sadness, right? So you can watch an actor be sad, express grief, and feel that with them through sympathy or empathy, but it's something else just to see the words, "he was sad." That doesn't quite have the same effect. There's something too clinical, too clean about that, too distant, distracted, ripped away from the emotional source. And that's what the middle part of this feels like to me. There is still a melancholic element, a somber mood to what the guitars are doing, but it feels more factual, like it being stated, this is sad, kind of lacking the emotional weight. I find this to be really interesting because what this part shifts into, the drums are loud, they're aggressive, they're dominant against everything else in this section. The mix is really interesting in that, as far as everything's balanced. The guitars aren't quite as large as the drums, but the vocals also have a lot of precedence here too, being incredibly present in the mix and having a low to mid-fi inaudibility. I don't know if that's a word. They're not quite audible. There's not a lot of, well, I'm going to assume it's probably also in Spanish, so there's going to be a language divide, but I also had a really tough time hearing any enunciation at all. It was more of that lo-fi black metal. I can tell someone's screaming, but honestly, there's not much that I hear in the way of syllables. It's just a lot of grunts or long held out sounds of compression. I believe the purpose of this moment is to express the pain of the grief, with where the sorrow becomes secondary to the pain, which leads to anger. And so we kind of have this trio of emotions here of sadness, pain, and anger. And the rage is kind of boiling through to the top. And I think that the drums and the vocals being so high in the mix is the point of that. If you listen to the guitars, they're not really aggressive, not in the way that punk or even metal can be, where the vocals and the drums and the guitars are all equally aggressive and create this aggressive atmosphere. The guitars are really tame here in comparison, both in timbre, texture, the way that they sound, but also in what they're playing. I found that to be really interesting, but also the guitars are simplified, where previously we had melody with a little bit of variation in what they were doing. This is just chords. The entire time we're in this moment, it's just chords. It almost feels like the complexity of what we saw earlier has now been reduced, the vulnerability removed, and kind of focusing on a factual description of what's happening. I find that to be a really compelling musical idea. Now, granted, again, sonically, not really my cup of tea right here, but I really like the artistic presentation in this moment. It stands out to me as something different. It's not too often that we listen to aggressive music where the guitars aren't aggressive too. So many aggressive genres are guitar focused, primarily because they're either punk or metal based. The guitars are the focus in these genres generally, and if you're going to get some aggression, yeah, vocals help. harsh vocals, but also guitar tones and sick riffs and heavy grooves. Like that's the kind of stuff you're typically going to see, and it's the opposite here. I find that really compelling because of the way that it presents these emotions in a hierarchy. It's a very cool idea right there. I had mentioned that we had the snare roll transition into this moment, and we actually saw something really cool coming out of this moment. I had mentioned during the reaction, we start to see some of the drum accent patterns and some of the guitar riffs that we saw in the A section show up here. I don't know if any of them are one-to-one exact pulled from the beginning, or if it's more of using the compositional techniques from that first section here and making new riffs based on the same foundations. But it feels so much like bringing that original vibe back, and it really begins to have this sorrow, this grief bubbling back up, trying to contend with the rage. And eventually the rage peters out and we dive back into a very vulnerable, somber ending to wrap the track up on. And I love that journey of this, because when it comes to sadness, when it comes to grief, when it comes to pretty much anything melancholic, anger is something that generally gets connected in there some way. Whatever made you sad, yeah, in the moment you're upset about it. You feel the sorrow, but eventually you also wish you could have changed it. Or that, you begin to see the cause of what led into these events. Now you have somewhere to place blame, and where blame comes, anger. And I really like how this shows the battle between sorrow and anger in the process of grief, or at least that's what I'm feeling out of the music anyways. Of course, I'm not basing any of this on the lyrics. It could be that their intentions for this are a little bit different. But that's what I'm understanding out of the music here. And yeah, dude, that is a ride to be on. And I'm glad I got to experience this. This is a very cool song. Um, is this new, by the way? I've never heard of this group before. 2020. Okay, so new-ish, but not brand new. I might have to check this album out. And it seems they did put an album out last year. 2025 album in April. Okay, yeah. I might end up checking that one out too. Let me hit some lyrics on this, see if I can find any, and then we're going to wrap this one up. All right, this was in Spanish, and so I couldn't find a hand translation of it, so we're using Google Translate. Maybe some inaccuracies here. It says sometimes by shadow, sometimes by light, sometimes alone, and other times not by yourself. So I like that. It says that this can happen anywhere. Now, what I really like about this is that it almost exists on two levels, and I think it's because of a couple of specific elements, specific phrases used in here, as well as one line that I think causes it to go in a feminist direction. But I think aside from those two small elements, I can also see this in more of a global direction. And I think the best artwork kind of exists in realms like that, where there is some variability to scope, and thus it can be something that appeals to people from multiple walks of life. Regardless, as it says, this can happen anywhere. It says, my instinct guides me. It's my greatest weapon against your predatory and disgusting behavior. Sometimes I transform hatred into a terrible urge to become invisible. The more courage grows, the more resentment floods in. Agents of chaos reclaiming violence. As girls, we grew up being cautious, never walking alone, day or night. We learned in time to deal with the world with the open wound of shared trauma. keys between our fingers, pepper spray, and a knife. Faithful allies against the same enemy. This idea of learning how to survive in a harsh world. And part of that is learning violence. Mentions the keys between the fingers, pepper spray, and knives, all weapons you can easily carry with you. I like how it creates a communal element here. It's talking about all women growing up eventually find themselves in a situation like that. And that is an unfortunate statistic about this world. Regardless of country, there is a really high statistic that women will be assaulted. And I don't know if it does say de niñas. So, I mean, that's girls. I assume that is more on the younger side. And I think it is something that most women end up learning young in their life, usually as a child or a teen. You know, when I say child, I'm usually talking about a teen in this situation. But it is something they learn early on. Says that we are allies against the same enemy, learning to deal with the world with the open wound of shared trauma. This isn't one-off situations. These are a lot of people coming together with the same stories happening over and over and over through the decades, through the eras. Nothing has changed. It is an incredibly sad song. I think that really embodies the intro and outro of this track, but that sadness turns into anger when it's still an issue right now. And that's where a lot of this frustration in the lyrics comes from. And it all circles back to the title of the track. Nonviolence is something only for the privileged. In this situation, you can't live a life of nonviolence. And I think that's, like I mentioned, if you remove the specific thing about the pepper spray and the knife and the keys between our fingers, and just kind of focus on general weapons there and remove the idea about girls specifically learning how, or learning that they can't walk alone ever, never walking alone night or day, it becomes a rallying cry against any sort of oppressor. That those who are the most vulnerable don't have nonviolence as an option on the table because their aggressors will use violence. And I think every other line fits in this idea of coming together to support each other against a violent aggressor. And while those couple of lines do put it more into a feminist perspective, I do think it is something that a lot of people can get behind, both from the feminist. I'm not a woman, and I can still, align my values with this track, but I can also apply it to myself too. I think that's pretty cool. And like I've said, I think a lot of the best art kind of walks that line where it is both personal and uh, subjective to the audience. Very cool stuff. And, you know, in a way, almost, it's a bit more melodic than, dang, why am I blanking out on the name of that band? Capra. It's a little bit more melodic than Capra, but I feel a lot of the same emotional beats and lyrical themes in this too. And they're both punk groups too. So I really like Capra, and I'm digging a lot of what's going on here. Like I said, I'm going to check out more of them for sure, but after reading the lyrics, I'm definitely on board. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me then. These are my thoughts on Habak's, what is this? Why do I keep forgetting the name of this track? La no violencia es un privilegio. Let me know what you thought of this, though. Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this? Let me know. Put all that down into the comment section along with anything else you'd like to add to the conversation. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.